again, this story really exploded over the weekend because $9 billion being the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
When you've got a young YouTuber that all he did was go to all of these different, and there was no children, no,
and yet the governor has to hire an outside audit firm, right?
But Governor Walz's response is, well, I've taken all these steps to deal with it, but you haven't. And the critics of Walz are saying this is because you can't get elected in that state without the Somali community. It's about votes.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's trickle-down politics in this case. You're fraudulently spending money to gain votes. But what's amazing to me, I've been in the markets for 20-plus years, and whenever you see accounting irregularities, they never get better. It gets worse. So this $9 billion number is probably going to grow to 10, 12, 14 billion, which ironically is the size of the whole Somali GDP. So we're talking about a massive fraud, to your point, that if it's avoided, we could fund a lot of these other things that are actually necessary to keep the government going.
Kash Patel, obviously, and we read his statement, talking about that there has been investigations that have begun, but much, much more needs to be done. The fact that they've surged agents into Minneapolis is a good beginning. Lou, when Elon Musk and Doge began in early 2025, many were cheering that work because I can't tell you how many stories I've seen on local news, national news about Medicare fraud, for example. And are we any better off now than we were at the beginning?
I would say definitively no. I mean, this is proof positive of it. I think this has now become not a state level issue, it's a federal systems failure, and we got to go back to Doge. We have to go and root it out. I mean, if someone on a social media platform in a simple interview and doing a little bit of investigative work can root out potentially $9 billion in fraud, what else is out there?
And Lou Basenese, get in here, because obviously we look at, there's technically 4 candidates, but really there's 2, and we're kind of now between Kevin Warsh and Kevin Hassan. Is kind of where the rubber meeting the road is. It's up to the president, of course. But what do you make?
I think Kevin Hassan is the consensus likely pick for the market right now. But my question that I'm concerned about, and I think most investors are, is can you maintain independence, right? Is there a perception of independence? I think that's most important. I do think you have to counterbalance the strong GDP growth, right? The consensus says that it should lead to inflation. But most of the issues that are contributing to inflation right now are still structural, right? So you look at housing, healthcare, energy. Those are things that are not demand-driven, right? So we can have strong economic growth, GDP driven by the consumer, and not really. And as long as we're having reforms on those structural issues, which we are on energy, we're starting to on healthcare, we can bring down that other side of the.
Right. What do you say to that, Lou Basenese?
Yeah, Gordon, I'm admittedly a contrarian here, and here's why. I think the pace of innovation is so rapid in the chip space, and China only makes up about 15% of Nvidia's sales. So they're doing about 100 to 110 billion outside that. I would rather have a U.S. company generate the revenues wherever it's coming from in the world to reinvest and keep that pace of innovation ahead. I believe that this first mover advantage, that gap between China and the U.S. right now, is not something that can be easily closed just by opening up and giving access. But Gordon, I'd ask you, I know you think differently, how do you see China, if we ban sales of them gaining access through third parties, won't they eventually find a way to gain access to these chips?
Well, they already have. So, for instance, we know that Tencent, the Chinese internet giant, has been using Blackwell chips, Nvidia's most advanced, in a data center in Osaka. And also Alibaba and ByteDance have been using advanced Nvidia chips in data centers in Singapore and Malaysia. Now, President Trump could have stopped this. President Biden actually had a rule to prevent this, but President Trump rescinded it. So that's a mistake. But, NVIDIA is making a lot of money from China already, although they won't admit it. And Jensen Huang, I think, has not been entirely candid with the American people, because he's been making a lot of money from China on NVIDIA chips.
Perception versus reality is something that Stephen Moore, economist Stephen Moore, a frequent guest of our program, told Fox News Digital. And he said, look, median family income is up about $1,200 for this year. And that's adjusted for inflation. And then you look at the stock market. 160 million Americans participate in the stock market.
Yeah, the wealth effect is real, and I think the wage effect is going to be real too. It's the data point that stands out to me. S&P 500 companies' profit margins are at a decade high at 13.1%. So Employment and hiring has been lagging, has been going down, but now companies are in a position where they can start paying higher wages, which is going to show up, not just in the tax cuts and the payroll benefit cuts that show up in the beginning of the year. You're going to start seeing income growth, in my opinion, really accelerate. And then the other key that I think really changes the dynamic and takes us from 4.3% GDP to 5%, which I know Larry Kudlow's been advocating for, is real estate. It was a 0.2% drag on GDP this quarter. You flip that and you don't have a decrease and it's a contributor positively
What do you
to
mean
GDP.
flip real estate, though?
So real estate, so if you get to better affordability, you get more buying activity. Residential investment was down 5.1% for the last 2 quarters.
Right, we've got a stuck market.
Right, which dragged down GDP. It would have been 4.5% instead of 4.3. So we get an unstuck market. You open up the real estate development. It's a supply issue. It's not necessarily a price issue. Now you see we're at 4.5, maybe 4.7% GDP. A few other things kick in. Wages increase. We can get there because personal consumption, it was on non-durable goods and services, right? So consumers aren't spending on one-ticket items. They're spending just generally and broadly.
2 words, portable mortgages.
I'm for it.
Again, taxpayer money, but also fiscal irresponsibility. And this is why Elon Musk and Doge went to work in the spring.
Sure.
But there's so much more fraud that's being uncovered and waste that's being uncovered.
And in this case, what upsets me, the more we talk about it, is this aid was meant for kids. And here you are stealing from the outcomes of kids. And I think the incentives are misaligned, right?
Yeah.
We talk about spending speed instead of oversight and outcomes on the front side, right? What is this supposed to do? How are we going to measure the success? And how are we going to monitor it as this money is being distributed? Instead, it was just get it out there, flood the system, see what happens. And we saw this through COVID, too, with loans to companies that were exploited and fraudulent. So I think at the end of the day, the net impact is mistrust, right, in the government to do anything effectively on the state or federal level. But more importantly, it's an economic impact, right? You're taking money out of the system.
Mistrust is already out there. And again, these progressive candidates in 2026, what we saw unfold in New York and in New Jersey to a lesser extent is certainly something that I know that the Republican Party is talking about to make sure that they don't lose the House. That would change. That would derail the Trump agenda completely.
I think it comes down to talking. You mentioned messaging. The congressman earlier today talked about the narrative. The Democrats, by and large, have always won the messaging and the narrative war. The substance is always lacking, but because they can get out in front and make people think this is what's going to happen, the follow-through is not there. I think Republicans are waking up to this finally, and it needs to happen for the midterms. Continue getting the narrative right because you have the fundamental back.
Messaging.
Yes.
I brought that up 10 times this morning. All right, let's get some final thoughts from this all-star panel. All right, Lou Basenese.
Bet big on the USA in 2026. I mean, I'm very bullish on the markets. All the underlying trends are positive. The big, beautiful bill is going to go into effect, and I think you're going to see some very unexpected trades work out well. Energy, biotech's going to be back. Innovation is alive and well. The president is ushering in a new economic boom. Make sure you're exposed to it. Don't buy into any of the bearish headlines. I don't see a reason to be pessimistic whatsoever anywhere I look.
Yeah. All right, David Abella, Lou Basenese. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.